All right, so this week, as I was muddling around thinking, oh, what can we talk about this week? And I have a couple things that I'm working on, but they're not ready yet. I thought we should talk about the decision-making stuff. We should talk about two of the very, very important tools that are available in Desert Pencil. And I thought about showing you guys how to do this on the calculator. And then I thought, no, it's easier in the webinar just to show you the spreadsheet. Then I thought, well, I can't just show you the spreadsheet. I need to give you a spreadsheet tool, which I'm going to do. Don't worry. We're going to talk about today our internal rate of return and net present value. So I am 318 years old. I know I don't look like it, but I took this stuff a long time ago. And unfortunately, when I went to college, when I was in graduate school, the TAs didn't speak English, which I thought was really a ripoff. And I went to one of my professors one day and I said, I am spending $358 a semester on tuition here, and I'm not kidding you. That's how much it was in the 80s, $358 a semester. And here I was just all, hot and bothered about that. But anyway, I'm like, I can't talk to them because we don't talk the same language. Oh, well, math is the international language. Yeah, really, man? So is vodka, but, anyway. So that didn't work out very well. But somehow I muddled through. But, at the collegiate level back in the 80s, it was very confusing. And I know a lot of the kids that I was in college with didn't understand it either. And when I took it again, when I took the CCIM curriculum, it kind of made more sense. But I hope that my presentation will even make more sense. So as we graduate, we hopefully get better. All right. So some of you have seen this before. Some of you hadn't. As always, bring pen and paper to this thing. I'm going to start with the basic philosophy of what I call the investment life cycle, okay? So any and every investment in anything you will ever make always has three parts to it, and they're aptly named the beginning, the middle, and the end. All right, so the beginning, the middle, and the end. This is the simplest way to understand what happens in any investment that you're making, okay? So very simply, you buy it, you hold it, and you sell or you die, okay? Now, I've been doing this a long time, and it's taken me a long time for this basic idea to make its impression in my own brain. But this is really true. This is what it is, and this is what it is for everything that you'll ever buy over the course of your whole life. These are the three steps to it, all right? So I take these three steps and then I put them into a simple T account, which just looks like that. Okay, it's just a basic two-column account. And the account has two headings, time and cash flow, time and money. Okay, just two columns, that's all it is. So inside this two-column account, we can expand this basic idea of buy, hold, and sell or die, also known as beginning, middle, end, and we can numerize it. So when we use a T account, we always begin starting to count time with the number 0, which I know is weird in America, because in America, we always learn, oh, no, you always start beginning with the number 1. Well, not in the T account. You begin with the number 0. And 0 is the beginning of this investment life cycle thing, as I call it. And at what's called time period 0, for the cash flow part, we actually pay money out. Now, if we're buying a real property investment, I'm going to put brackets here to denote a negative, meaning I'm paying it out. It's a negative number. We pay out our down payment, which is DP, plus a term called OCA, which is known as the other costs of acquisition. Okay, and I'm going to pause there for just a second. When you work in a T account, what is critical to remember, and this is very critical, These are not price models. These are cash models. So you only recognize the amount of cash flow that is going out or coming in these models, right? So if you pay all cash, then at time period 0, it's the price. But if you're borrowing money, it's not the price, it's the cash that you put out. It's a very important concept about using these T account models. It's always the cash. All right, so we're going to continue down the line of time, and I'm just going to make an estimate here of 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Okay, so when you use these models, what you are doing is you are making a guess as to how long you're going to own the asset. All right. Now, the way I teach this in Does It Pencil is like this. Let's just say you're buying a duplex, just to pick something. You don't have to sell the duplex in 4 years, but at some point in time, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 10 year, 20 year, if you're going to use these T accounts, you have to make an estimation as to what you believe the value of the property will be. And in Does It Pencil, by the time we get to this part in course 2, we've already done tons of time value of money basic appreciation. So that's usually what I will say. I will say, when you bought this asset at 0, just do some time value of money, throw in a nominal rate of appreciation, plug that in out here, and you can use that, okay? Or however you do it. But these are closed models. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're not in perpetuity, so you have to have an end number. And so in this example, I'm just going to assume that I'm holding this asset for 4 years. So inside of the T account, at the part called the middle, we use something called PTCF. And if it's been a while since you took Does It Pencil Course 1, this is pre-tax cash flow. And I'll put a little star right here and then kind of asterisk over here. This comes from the APOD form that I teach in Does It Pencil Course 1. So this is the income minus the vacancy plus the other income minus the expenses minus the debt, your monthly pay or your annual payment. That's what's going to give you this PTCF number. Okay, I cover all this in Does It Pencil Course 1. I'm not doing it today, but that's what this is. And this is going to happen every year that you own the asset. Now, in the T account model, I don't use the terminology years. I actually call them time periods. And that's important because when we do different time value of money modalities in Does It Pencil, if I used years, I've done this and people get confused. So in a T account, it's time period 0, time period 1, time period 2, and so on and so on and so on, okay? Now, when you get to the end of your holding term, your anticipated holding term, again, you don't have to sell the property, just have to make an estimation of its future value. You introduce a new term here, which I'll abbreviate this way, PTSP. So this is pre-tax sales proceeds. So if you're going to do this calculation, this assumes that you estimate a future value of the property, you subtract closing costs, you subtract debt. This is all pre-tax, that's why it says PT. But you really scrub this number to get it down to, if everything went the way I thought it would, and I were to sell, what would I walk out of the escrow with before I recognize my federal and or state income tax? That's what this PTSP is, okay? Now, last point about the T accounts, and this is super important. In the last year of your T account, however many years you use, but in the final year, it's called the reversion, you have to add the cash flows to the sales proceeds because they both occur in the same time period. So for example, if I sell my duplex today, September 19th, I get the benefit of all the cash flows in this time period year, plus I receive the other part of it in the year. Okay. So I get both in the same time period, and that's why they're added together in my last year of ownership. That is a critical point and a common mistake that people make. You got to add those two together in your final year. Okay. All right. So I get all this done, and I've got this T account. All right. Now before I go to the next part, let me just kind of walk through this from more of a so-called real world perspective and just tell you what's going on here. Okay. And I'm going to use a very simple example here. Let me just write this down up here because this will help make it even simpler. Let's say it's a duplex. Say the price is $500,000. All right. And let's say that when I go through the rent, the vacancy and expenses and all the tralalas, every year, because this is annual, my pre-tax cash flow is $5,000. Okay. And I had an 80% loan to value when I bought the property. All right. So what would happen here when I populate this T account is here at zero, I would put in negative 100,000. Right. Because that'd be my down payment on that loan. And then I put, because I said here I had 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. And then if my $500,000 property appreciated, like, for example, at 3% a year for 4 years, whatever that ends up being, I would put that number. So let me just expand this a little bit here. So PTSP is going to be sales price minus costs minus loan payoff. Okay, that's what gives you the PTSP. In other words, what I walk out of the escrow with. Okay, so when I build my T account, I put that with this together, add them up, and boom, now I have a completed T account. Okay, once I have my completed T account, I can do my first calculation to measure return on investment, which is what I call IRR, or internal rate of return. So internal rate of return is the overall rate of return expressed annually from beginning to middle to end. Okay. Now here's what I've learned in the last 20 years of doing this, probably, is that the reason that IRR is so valuable is because it's a model that picks up the appreciation. And what we've found, especially as the criminals at the Fed, you heard me say this before, keep manipulating interest rate markets, is that prices are going up and down because of it. Okay? So if markets move on anticipation of future lower interest rates, and we can talk about that later today if you want, because I saw Jay Powell being interviewed yesterday. There is some new news. Then we can anticipate this inverse correlation of prices going up. That's time value of money. If the payment's the same, the rate goes down, present value goes up, market absorbs it. That was all the COVID money, COVID rates, and why prices went up. Okay? So in the meantime, for many of these smaller properties especially, and I'll just call them randomly $1 million or less, that have existed especially in coastal markets, Seattle, San Diego, Manhattan, and Miami, investors have been willing to pay for negative cash flow in exchange for future appreciation. And I have lived through this. I have been doing this work. I have been teaching Does a Pencil while all this has been going on. And I would say probably started noticeably and in earnest like around 2002, 2001, kind of in that era, back when Greenspan was running the show. And we were watching rates come down and prices going up. And I'm going, this is interesting. At the same time, I would go down to like San Diego and teach Desert Pencil, and they go, oh yeah, we have 40-year mortgages now. Okay. And so what that 40-year mortgage is going to do is it's going to decrease the amount of payment because it spreads it over a longer term. Just a sec. Sorry about that. Spreads it over a longer term. You're going to pay more interest, but on a cash flow basis, you're not as bad because you're not paying out as much. Okay, so that's another market manipulation if you want to think of it that way. Okay, but I don't see 40-year mortgages much anymore. I just remember for a while in San Diego, this was a thing. I'm like, God, you guys just think of everything down here. But that was the days when they were doing 40-year mortgages and telling people that were living in apartments, hey, you can buy a house with no money and your payment's less than your mortgage payment, and we don't care about how bad your credit is. This is why the T account is so important, in my opinion, because this is where the appreciation is recognized. Okay, and this is a key feature for investors, because if this is negative as you're going all along your merry way, then this has to be positive or you're screwed. Okay? And the thing that's so awesome about the T account, I think, is that, here, just look. It's just right in front of you, just like this. And I've seen so many light bulbs go on in my teaching career because finally people go, oh, now I see. Mr. Smith in the bathroom with the pipe wrench. Okay. So internal rate of return will weigh all of this based on these two axes, the time and the money. Okay, and it'll spit out an answer expressed as a percent. And we'll do this here in a little bit. Okay, I've got this spreadsheet for us. I want to do the lecture first. And this will be your overall rate of return. Okay, and I'm not going to argue this today, but I'm just going to tell you now my argument is that this is a much more valuable, much more accurate, much more useful tool than cap rate is any day of the week. Any day of the week. But people are only as smart as what they know, and most people, well, I say this sort of loosely, most people know cap rate, not IRR. Well, I've learned that most people don't even know what cap rate is, but we won't get into that today. All right, so we're going to pause there for a second. Is there anything about the T account or just the opening salvo about internal rate of return that you want me to do again? You got any questions? We doing okay? All right, excellent. Okay, let me show you the other thing that we're going to do. And this is called net present value. So net present value is, this is a pricing model. Okay. And what this thing does is it tells you one thing. How much should I adjust the event that occurs at time period 0? How much should I adjust the cash that I'm putting out in order to achieve something called my desired return? All right. Now, this is pretty simple thinking, but it's also not very common thinking, especially in the real estate circle. Okay. And I think I'm fairly safe in saying the reason it's not very common is because, number one, when we talk return in the real estate market, most people only talk about cap rates. And I've seen too many cases, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years where, once again, the uninformed, well, let's call it what it is, listing agent, comes out and says, oh, this is an awesome investment. You know, it's a 4 cap in a 7% interest rate environment. Well, that's immediately a loss of 300 basis points. Why would I even talk to you? But people only are smart as what they know. Okay? Net present value takes the same conundrum, which is, what should I pay for this? And it kind of turns the box around. And what I mean by turning the box around is it asks two questions. One is, what return do you want? And that is such an important question. And I know when I started doing this, some of you had never even thought about that, but we've talked about it more, and it takes time to kind of retrain your old brain and get a new brain, all that kind of thing. But really kind of starting at the beginning and saying, this is the rate of return that I want or that I desire, that I hope to get, is a very important part of investing. Super important. And I've spent time on this call in the past talking about, safe rate for money market funds. We can get at bonds, get in private equity, returns to the S&P, what gold has done. I've shown you and talked about all these different things. And all of that can be measured in a rate of return. And I think that this rate of return business is so bloody important because at the so-called end of the metaphor day, you're not buying the investment. You're not buying the thing. You're buying what you believe the thing will do for you. Okay? And that's mindset. Right now in a safe deposit box, I've got a ton of gold. Okay, not a ton, but I mean, I've been buying gold for a long time. It's appreciated significantly. But what am I going to go in the store and, walk into Nordstrom and go, here, will you take this for a pair of shoes? I'm not going to do that, obviously. Okay, I have to go convert it into cash and whatever else. I'm not going to do that right now. But my point is, it's just a thing that sits there and appreciates. That's all it is. And it's no different than a stock that just sits there on a computer screen. You watch it go up and down or whatever. Okay, you're watching it do something. Hopefully it does what you want it to do. Well, me and my partner bought that little house in Lakewood. We split off the lot. Okay, and I've said this a million times. That was a play on appreciation. We didn't buy that property to be landlords of a single family rental home, especially a vacant one. We bought that property to create value in the form of appreciation. So understanding what you're trying to do and having some indice or some aspiration or some general market knowledge of rate of return, I think is really a foundational thing that all of us need to think about. And if you've never thought about it, start. You got to start somewhere. Start today. Ask yourself, what rate of return is okay with me? And don't be ridiculous either. Oh, I heard that NVIDIA stock's up 500%. Yeah, and that's an outlier. That's not common at all. Don't use weird, and I've done this with students. Oh, I want a 300% return. Be reasonable, okay? But start somewhere. Okay, anyway, so NPV says you have to tell me, the model, what rate of return you want. So that is an external number that you have to bring into the model. Okay, you don't solve for that. You bring it in. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, here's the second thing NPV does. NPV says, by its nature, I'm just going to make up these numbers. So we'll have 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, and time period 4, 5,000 plus 200,000. Okay, and we put down 100,000 here, let's just say. Okay, so NPV says by its nature that from time period 1 on, it is what it is. You can't change it. So if you go to market, staying on my duplex example, if you go to market and say, I'm going to buy this duplex, we did an APOD, I already know it's going to make this much, this much, this much, this much every year. That's the middle, that's the cash flow part. And I assume at the end, I'll get, in my example here, 200,000 because of appreciation. Then this is like, I can't touch this stuff. That's what it is, all right? So what you're left with is this. How much can you adjust the amount of cash that you pay to achieve your desired return? That's what NPV does. So it's not a price model, it's a cash model. And the only thing that you can do is affect the amount that you pay at time period 0. That's what NPV does for you, okay? Now I'm going to show you one other little graph kind of thing on NPV, and then we'll get into the spreadsheet. So let me expand my T account a little bit here. I didn't pre-draw this, sorry. I tried to, so I don't do too terrible of a job, but we'll see if we can make it through. Okay, so I show up and go, oh, awesome duplex. And I want to earn 12% on my money. Okay, that's my desired. I don't solve for this. I have to bring this to the party. Okay, what NPV does internally inside is a series of discounting of time value of money. Okay, you don't see this, but this is what it's doing. It's saying make this at year one, time period one, that future value, 12 is my rate, my IYR in the HP 10B2. 1 is my term, solve for the PV. Then it comes out here and it says, this is the future value. 12 is still my return that I want. 2 is my term because it's in time period 2. Solve for the PV. And then it does it here and it does it here. Okay, so it solves for all these PVs and then it nets them together. That's why it's called net present value. It nets the present value of future cash flows at time period 0. And when it adds all these up, it gives you a hard number. It does not give you a percent. It gives you a hard number. So for example, and I haven't done this yet, but let's just say that I did it and my number was 12,000. Okay, and that number is positive. Okay, what it would say then is this: if I buy this duplex and I get 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, 205,000, if this is what it's going to give me, and I am looking for a 12% return, then I can afford to pay 112,000 at time period 0 to get my 12% return. And that's because this NPV was positive. So sign convention is very important with NPV. If I would have plugged in all this stuff, 12%, and I haven't done this yet, so I'm just making this up to make my point. And let's say that it said my NPV was negative 5,000. Okay. Then what it's signaling me is if I'm going to buy this and I want this, then I can only pay 95,000 to get my 12%. That's how NPV works. This is also known, all this NPV stuff, this is a discounted cash flow analysis. That's what it is, or a DCF. This is what discounted cash flow analysis is. Okay, so I know I'm being redundant. I'm going to say this one more time just to put belt and suspenders on it. When we solve for net present value, we're not solving for a rate of return. We're solving for a hard number. And we're taking what we anticipate the future cash flows of the investment to be, and we're holding them up against an expectation that we bring into the model. Once we do that, it tells us how much we can adjust the outflow at time period 0. It assumes everything else is fixed. This is the only thing that we can have any affect over is the outflow at time period 0. Now, if this is the price, then that's what you're changing. If this is the down payment, then that's what you're changing because, again, just like in IRR, these are cash models. Okay, so if you're going to do this, do not put like the price in here and then the cash flows, because that would not be correct, because you wouldn't be contemplating for debt, right? So this is the, again, here. So I said beginning, middle, end. Okay, here's another synonym for this little anomaly: cash out, cash flow, cash in. You pay the cash out here at time period 0. You get the flows while you're going along, and cash in comes at the end. Okay? All right. You know, I'm just going to say right now, that's probably the best sermon I've ever given. And you guys are the benefactors. So you're welcome.